When you look at the most popular gaming mascots in the world, there are two that come way above everyone else. And they are of course Bounder and Squeak. Maybe not. Ah yes, these two. Easily the most recognisable faces in all of gaming. A fat beardy plumber chasing turtles and eating mushrooms, and a blue hedgehog who goes after fat beardy scientists collecting rings and eating chili dogs. Who could have possibly predicted it? I bet Squeak and Bounder are looking pretty normal now, aren't they? Well, regardless, it seems the more popular a video game character becomes, the more ridiculous the games are. Yes, even more ridiculous. It's only a matter of time before you end up getting something like this. Or this. And sadly the people behind them end up having their hands tied with absolutely no chance of going elsewhere. Which is a real shame, because when people like Shigeru Miyamoto get the chance to try something new, we get this. God damn, I love this game. And when people like Yuji Naka get the chance to do something new, we get this. Nights into Dreams, the one game that I was seriously jealous of my buddies down the road owning whilst I played on my soppy PlayStation. Now looking back, I most definitely made the right choice with my PlayStation past. But that still didn't stop me from seriously wanting to play the game, and when I finally did, I was hooked. In fact, if my memory serves me correctly, I actually ended up getting a Sega Saturn before I eventually got my PlayStation 2, at a time when games were no more than a $5, and I personally had a kick-ass time with this misguided system, which perhaps I wouldn't have got so early on if it wasn't for this game. So, join me as we take a look back at one of Sega Saturn's most popular games, and for good reason, as we take a look back at the story, the development, the people behind it, and of course, the games. Welcome to Slope's Game Room. Dreams. That's a pretty weird concept to base your game around, am I right? Heck, I can't even remember what my dreams are about half the time, and thankfully that's a good thing, because if they was going to be developing a game on the dreams that I actually do remember, actually, forget I said anything. Thankfully, I make YouTube videos instead. Nights into Dreams was a complete breath of fresh air that literally nobody was expecting. A game that instantly understood the analog stick, and a game that everybody, not just including myself, wanted to play. But hold up. Before we get into the Saturn's new venture in place of all things blue and spiky, I think we're in fact getting a little ahead of ourselves. So, let's go back to the beginning. The Sega Saturn. It had a tough time outside of Japan, and to this day is probably one of Sega's most mysterious mainline consoles. It didn't really have any major game changers, and although we will one day go into detail about the failed Sonic attempts for the system, the important thing to note is that this is all we got. Mega Drive ports and an awful racing game, albeit with a kick-ass soundtrack. You see, Yuji Naka changed the game with Sonic the Hedgehog, and it's easy to see exactly why it was just so popular. Yes, it's a great game and all with tight controls and colourful graphics, but more importantly, the secret sauce with Sonic was taking a genre that is easily at its absolute peak by this point, and revving it up to first gear. Sonic was something new and something fresh that grabbed the eyeballs of all who saw it, and that's exactly why he didn't want to continue with the franchise. As usual, Naka wanted to try something new, and just like Sonic the Hedgehog before it, there was nothing that was like it at the time, which is why the team literally made everything from scratch, working it out as they went along. Originally only starting with 6 people consisting of 3 programmers, 2 artists and a game designer, one Takeshi Iizuka, the project, as you would expect, finally got out of hand, with 20 people eventually jumping on to finish the game. In fact, the story at the first stage ended up taking a whole 2 years to finalise before they got it to a stage of perfection that they were happy with. Naka didn't even completely know what he wanted either, realising after the game's completion that inspiration must have been taken from his favourite live shows, Cirque du Soleil. The inspiration is now glaringly obvious, not just in its overall colourful art style and design, but more importantly, its ballerina style flying that you do with each stage in a graceful fashion that has never been seen before. And as this was such a different approach to what was going on over on Sony's platform, it was obviously constantly hitting walls, and one of the biggest challenges was the controller. With games like Virtual Fighter in mind, the Sega Saturn controller is actually a pretty solid piece of kit. But for a game where doing spirals and constant floating is the key, they needed something new, something that the other competition was doing. They needed an analog. So, in a non-caring how long this bloody thing will take or cost, the team ended up making a whole new controller for Nights into Dreams. A controller that for its time was so good it even got a thumbs up from Steven Spielberg, who according to Naka was one of the very first people to ever use it. Anyway, random facts aside, the controller was definitely a hit with all who had played with it. And for anyone that has ever played Nights without this 3D control pad, you might as well have not even bothered. Hashtag slope fact. So with its pretty standard but still incredibly long making behind us, let's take a look at the game, shall we?
There's never been a game like Sega Saturn's Nights. Never been a game that's allowed you to fly, fluid and free, in real-time 3D. Never, not anywhere. But especially not on that other system. Simply because, with only one processor, it doesn't have the power to do it. Fly, plaything, fly. You're not ready. Sega!
So, what is Nights into Dream all about then? Well, it's actually a tad more deep than you may expect. So apparently every night all humans' dreams are played out in Nightopia and Nightmare, which are two different regions of the dream world. With this place, the dreamers' personalities are represented by coloured spheres that the evil Lord Wiseman the Wicked is stealing so he can use it to take over Nightopia and eventually our world too. Yeah, personally, I'm not one for these sort of over-elaborate storylines, and even though I've played and completed this game endless amounts of times, it's never the story in these types of games that pull me in. It's everything else. You see, hidden under all the crazy elaborate brain-hurting Jackie Chan memeing gumph of a storyline, what you have here is one of the best things that Sonic Team have ever pumped out. And honestly, that is quite an accomplishment. You got great controls, great visuals, great music, which I must say includes one of my fonder guilty pleasures. But best of all, what you get is an exclusive style of gameplay that is actually great fun to play. Playing it back for the first time in ages, I was surprised at how hard it was. I knew I had a lot more free time back in my teen years, but still, if you want to get an A rank on this game, you need to memorise it completely using that Spielberg controller. And yes, that's what the team called it during development. Before you truly master the game, and in my opinion, get the most enjoyment out of it. One thing I didn't mention beforehand that is on top of this whole Cirque du Soleil inspiration thing, the original idea came to him much earlier, during Sonic 2's development in fact. This was when Naka was boarding a flight and wondered how you would make a flying game. When you get good at this game and you become one with the controller, the feeling of flight is most definitely felt. You know, when you watch someone play games like Street Fighter or Tony Hawk's and the fingers are all waggling all over the controller in a hypnotic state? Get good at Nights and the same thing will happen to you. The gameplay changes up frequently via different perspectives that randomly appear throughout the levels and all work well and never ever outstay their welcome. And there's plenty of collectibles in the game too in the form of Nightopians. which, by the way, were the original inspiration to the Cheos in Sonic Adventure, don't you know? In review, the game, it is a little bit rough around the edges, but in all honesty, that happens to all early 3D rendered games. Thankfully, it has been slightly up-resed from the gritty Saturn looking game and can be downloaded on the PSN store for a few quid. And honestly, I think you can do a lot worse. Nights into Dreams is a great game, there's no doubt about it. It's not as pick up and play as I remember, but the more you play it, the more you get from it. And it quickly gained a cult following that to this very day Sega fans look back on with fond memories. Later that very same year, the Saturn, still doing great in Japan might I add, just like most consoles, released a Christmas bundle with a special present. Instead of just slamming together several popular games, Sega actually made an exclusive 2-level version of Nights into Dreams, simply titled Christmas Nights or Christmas Nights into Dreams, whatever you prefer. Sadly, us European and American players didn't get the fancy Christmas package, but instead got it for free, albeit in a boring cardboard sleeve. This was given away either by purchasing Daytona USA Championship Circuit Edition in the States, or just given away by Saturn magazines in the UK. It's basically the same thing, but this time the two are upset that they don't have a star to go on top of their Christmas tree, so return to the dream world, well, 2 levels of the dream world at least, which is now all Christmassy themed, so go and get it back. A tad pointless perhaps, but for me, I love that this thing actually exists. It's basically physical DLC for the 90s generation. Plus, like I said, it was free. Well, sort of. The whole idea is really just to gain more attention for the system, something Sega did again the very next generation. And in my opinion, it's a great idea. And what's probably best of all, other than the April Fool's Day prank that lets you play as the game's villain if you put it in on April the 1st, this, ladies and gentlemen, was the very first time that you could play as Sonic the Hedgehog in a 3D space. Yeah, it's tiny and a bit crap in all honesty, but come on. It was the first 3D Sonic game ever, and that's something worth acknowledging, I suppose. Shortly after one of the most popular games for the system was released, Naka and his team started to work on a sequel for the system. Eventually, focus moved to the Dreamcast, and in an interview with official Dreamcast magazine August 1999, one very simple question was put to Yuji Naka. Finally, is Nights 2 heading for the Dreamcast? In which he replied, yes. I was asked about this by many fans during this year's E3, even Nintendo's Mr. Miyamoto asked me if I was making it. But it's also enjoyable to work on brand new titles, maybe even more so than games from existing series. Oh, it doesn't sound too promising, does it? Well, a short year later in December 2000, when the Dreamcast was on its way out, he didn't want to make it anymore, and the project was ultimately cancelled. He jumped back in 2003, saying that he would like to use Nights to reinforce Sega's identity, and finally in 2006, when the Nights rumour mill was getting out of hand, it was finally leaked that it was indeed in production and was coming out. Anyway, amongst a slew of darker looking games, the light at the end of the tunnel that was the Nintendo Wii was glowing all around the world, and longtime Sega developer Takeshi Iizuka, who was the lead designer on that original game, decided that the world needed something a tad more family friendly, and started working on Air Nights, the development title for Nights Journey of Dreams.
What if you could truly fly beyond the day, past the night sky, to a place in a world where dreams come alive? A fantastic universe journey by night, where the freedom of flight is at your command. With just the wave of your hand. Knight's Journey of Dreams. Fall 2007. Exclusively for Wii.
The attempt to make the game a lot more understandable for Western players is crazy apparent here. Everything is voice acted, you got plenty of beautiful CGI cutscenes that Sonic Team became very well known for, and the game feels, dare I say it, a tad more open worldy compared to the mostly 2D style of the original. Overall, it's probably a better game than the original, and I most definitely do suggest you go and play it if you fancy something truly unique. However, the biggest issue for me is that it doesn't feel as smooth as the original. I'm really stuck as to whether this is nostalgia talking or not, because I did enjoy the game and I much preferred the story that came with it, even though it did drag in a few places. But for me, that almost unbelievable feeling you have with the controller from the first game, like I mentioned earlier, doesn't really replicate as well in this sequel. It's very rough around the edges in that regard. Thankfully, it's not just the core Knights gameplay that you have here. One thing the game does really well is change it up quite a bit with different styles of gameplay. It's a welcome addition to the formula for me, and if they did release a third game with a little sanding down of those rough edges, you would actually have a pretty damn solid game here. However, this game did get very average scores when it came out, and I personally would struggle to rate it much higher myself. Now, just a word of warning, the majority of Wii U players around the world did not like the Yuji Naka-made Radea the Sky Soldier. But honestly, I did. I really bloody liked this game, in fact. Sure, it had its issues, but I actually rated the game quite high myself, and I had a lot of fun playing it. So you might want to be taking that in mind, considering it is looked at as a spiritual successor to the Knights games, when you take my opinion on these games in this video. So, was that it? Pretty much. Sure, that original, like I said, was re-released on the PlayStation Store, but did you know it also got a pretty decent port to the PlayStation 2 as well that came with a nice little art book? On top of that, you also got the Tiger LCD game, which also got a port on the horrific R-Zone system. Clarice and Elliot send emails to the Burning Rangers, thanking them for their help in the game Burning Rangers. And yes, before you ask, I will be making a Burning Rangers video at some point. You got Knights themed pinball machines in both Sonic Adventure and Sonic Pinball Party. One of the better iToy minigames was based on Knights as part of the Sega Superstars PlayStation 2 game. And you can unlock Knights in both Sonic Riders and Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. You can play as both Knights and Riala in Sega Superstars Tennis, the amazing Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. However, Knights only appears as a traffic guard in the original game. You can download extra levels for Sonic Lost World, one of which being called Nightmare Zone, which was based on Knights. And not only do you get a free demo mini-game of Knights by plugging in GBA link cable with Phantasy Star Online Episode 1 and 2 and Billy Hatcher and the Giant Egg, but in Billy Hatcher, you also have Knights as an unlockable egg support character. And what else? Well, good old Archie Comics actually pumped out a very limited 3-issue comic series based on Knights that only gained enough interest for one more 3-issue series before it obviously got canned. So yeah, Knights into Dreams, or at least the Knights character, is yet another example of Sega hitting a home run. Looking back, they probably should have canned the idea and done a bloody Sonic game instead, but let's face it, if that did happen, we would have had a pretty crappy game. Knights, on the other hand, really did give us something new and something exciting. Something that hadn't been seen before, and something that will forever stand tall and proud next to Sega's most iconic game series. Which really ain't that bad, considering we've only really had 2 proper games and some quirky produced DLC. A game like Knights doesn't come along too often, and although this complete history will no doubt be defunct the next time Sega decide to squeeze him into whatever mashup game they have planned, I personally welcome them bringing him back as many times as they see fit. And yes, I said him. Knights, the bloke, the guy, the mush. Knights is a male, even though Yuji Naka originally made the character genderless in an attempt to appeal to a wider audience and let you, the player, decide on the sexuality of the main character. If you do go check out that short-lived Archie comic, they did let it slip. But hey, that's just a theory, a game theory, and cut! Hey there guys, thanks for checking out the Knights Complete History video. It's the time of the video where I say a big thanks to all of my Patreons, with a special shout out going to Matthew Ritter, Ryan Burford, Ian A. Chapman, Phil Lowlins, Downright Superb, James Loveridge, Casey Garner, Blitz Hedgie, Ben Hall, Taylor Ullman, Team Not Crash, and Tiago Piera dos Santos Silva. If you want to be part of the Patreon list, get your name shouted out, be part of the amazing Discord channel, see exclusive videos, or even be part of Q&A videos, then check the link in the description. Don't forget to do all that usual social media sharing, give the video a thumbs up, all that gump. But for now, that's it from me. This is DJ Slope signing out, and hopefully I'll see you all next time.